Think about the last time you bought a new phone. What made you pick that one? Was it the features, the price, or was it just the way it looked, the way it felt in your hand? Well, that's what we're diving into today. Because the rules that protect that unique look, yeah, they're changing in a really big way. So how exactly is a product's look protected? Well, the key is something called a design patent. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Getting a design patent is about to get way more expensive and a whole lot harder. And we're going to unpack exactly why that is and what it could mean for all of us.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll cover what a design patent actually is. Then, we'll get into that steep price hike and figure out why it's happening. After that, we'll look at a brand new legal hurdle that's popped up. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by talking about what this means for the future for innovators.
Okay, let's start with the basics. What even is a design patent? It's really simple. It's not about how something works. It's all about how it looks. Think of a classic sports car, right? A utility patent would protect the engine, the transmission, all the stuff that makes it go fast. But a design patent, that protects the sleek curves, the aggressive headlights, the look that makes you turn your head when it drives by. It is purely about the appearance.
And if we break it down, you can really see the difference. A utility patent, that's for function, can have a ton of different claims, and you have to pay fees over its 20-year life just to keep it active. A design patent, on the other hand, is all about the look. It's just a single claim for the design. It lasts 15 years, and here's the really crucial part. There are no maintenance fees. You pay once, and that's it. Now remember that little detail, no maintenance fees? Because it is right at the center of the big debate we're about to dive into.
All right, so let's get to the first major storm cloud gathering on the horizon for designers and innovators. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, you'll hear them called the USPTO, is proposing a pretty massive price hike for getting a design patent.
And when I say massive, I mean 48%. Yeah, you're seeing that right, 48%. We're not talking about some small little adjustment here. This is a huge shift that could completely change the financial game for anyone trying to protect a new design.
So, okay, what does a 48% increase actually look like in real dollars? Well, it means the total upfront cost jumps from around $1,760 all the way up to $2,600. For a big corporation, maybe that's nothing. But for a small business or an independent designer, that's not just a price hike, that's a serious roadblock. And you better believe this proposed hike isn't going through without a fight. Organizations like the International Trademark Association, which you'll see called INTA, are really sounding the alarm. They're arguing that this move could have some seriously bad consequences for creators and, the whole innovation economy.
So, you have to ask, why the huge increase? Well, as you can imagine, there are two very different stories here. The USPTO has its reasons, and its critics have their rebuttals. Let's take a look at both sides of the argument.
Okay, so from the USPTO's perspective, it's pretty simple. It's about balancing the books. They're saying that right now, the fees from utility patents are basically subsidizing design patents. And remember why? It's because design patents don't have those ongoing maintenance fees. So the USPTO feels like it's not recovering its costs over the long run. They also point out that there's been a big increase in discounted applications from smaller businesses, which also affects their bottom line.
But INTA comes back with some really strong counterarguments. First, they say the US is already the most expensive country in the world to get a design patent. This just makes it worse. Plus, innovators are already waiting almost 2 years just to get an approval. And about those discounted applications, INTA claims a lot of them are actually fraudulent, which means legitimate creators are the ones getting penalized. And finally, they argue that this whole subsidy thing is basically a rounding error, since design patents make up such a tiny percentage of the total applications.
And this brings us to a really quirky and kind of frustrating part of the U.S. system. It's called the single claim practice. What it means is that you can only protect one single design in each application. So let's say you're a designer and you create a new jacket, but you have 3 slightly different collar styles you want to protect. You can't just lump them all together. Nope, you have to file 3 separate full-cost applications, one for each collar.
So this is where INTA proposes a different path forward. They're saying, hey, instead of this huge fee hike, why don't we just change that single claim rule? Their idea is simple. Let people bundle multiple variations of a design into one application and just charge a small extra fee for each one. They argue it's a total win-win. It would mean less paperwork for the USPTO and way lower costs for innovators. Plus, it's how places like the EU and the UK already do it.
But believe it or not, rising costs are only half the story. It's like a 1-2 punch. Because at the exact same time all this is happening,
A major court decision has come down and completely rewritten the rules for what even counts as a new patentable design. The case you need to know is LKQ Corp versus GM. And in 2024, it basically dropped a bomb on the world of design patents. The court just threw out a legal test that had been used for decades, a test for deciding if a design was too obvious to get a patent. And they replace it with a brand new one that is much, much tougher.
So the old way of doing things was called the Rosen-Durling test. You can think of it as a really rigid two-step process. An examiner had to first find a single existing design that was basically the same as the new one. And if they couldn't find that one perfect match, the patent was pretty much good to go. It made it pretty hard to reject an application.
The new test, though, it's way more flexible and a lot more complicated. It's a 4-factor test, but the really critical change is this. It asks if an ordinary designer in the field would have been motivated to combine bits and pieces from different existing designs to create the new one. So now an examiner doesn't need to find one perfect match. They can pull from multiple sources and argue, hey, it would have been obvious to put these together.
And the bottom line is this. This new, more flexible test makes it a lot easier for an examiner to say no, and a whole lot harder for an inventor to prove that their design is genuinely new and unique. The bar for what's considered creative has just been raised big time.
So, let's step back. What does all of this mean for the future? For the actual creators and innovators out there? When you put these two huge changes together, the money part and the legal part, a really challenging picture starts to form.
What we're looking at is basically a perfect storm for innovators. On one hand, the costs are shooting up, making it way more expensive just to apply. And on the other hand, the legal bar is getting higher, making it harder to even get approved. And when you combine those two things, you get a massive new barrier, especially for small businesses and individual creators. You know, the very people who often come up with the most exciting new ideas.
And that leads us to this pretty stark warning from INTA. They say, quote, "The higher fees for design patents will stifle innovation and impede access to patent protection." The fear here isn't just that things will get a little harder. The fear is that it will stop innovation in its tracks, because people will just decide it's not worth the cost or the risk anymore.
So that's the big question we're left with, right? Are these changes just a necessary adjustment to keep the patent system balanced and financially sound? Or are we accidentally creating a future where only the biggest companies can afford to protect their ideas, and the next great design from a small inventor never even sees the light of day? The future of innovation could very well hang on that answer.